Hi, I'm Micah Clark with the American Family Association. Well, as you know, this was an election year, and I'm going to cover the primary results that happened on Tuesday. But first, I want to mention something. I hate doing this, but it's very important, and this happens from time to time. But our donations this year have dropped dramatically, and that happens a lot in election years. I know you get hit up for money. People focus on races. They give their extra donations sometimes to candidates, and we often see a drop-off in election years, particularly presidential election years. And we're experiencing that at AFA of Indiana. So if you're able to give a donation today or this week or in the next mailing that you'll receive soon, that would mean a lot to us. It would help us a great deal if you could donate to us. If you want to go online and donate, you can do that at afain.net. But your support is vitally important to us. So now I'm going to be using a lot of notes today. I don't do that a lot. Hope it doesn't make it too clunky. But as you can imagine, covering the election from Tuesday, I have a lot of notes I want to look at. So I get the numbers right for you so we can cover some things. Now, AFA does not endorse candidates. We're not a partisan group. You know we're conservative. I'm assuming most people watching this today, if you're an AFA follower, probably voted in the Republican primary, which dwarfed the Democrat turnout numbers because the Democrats didn't have as many contested races. But I will talk about some of those, but probably wind up inadvertently focusing a lot on the Republican primary. But I assume that might be where a lot of you voted, if you voted. But and again, some of the races I'm talking about are really, particularly in congressional seats, are Republican-held seats that many will assume will stay Republican-held. So they're probably more of interest to you all. But I want to mention a few things. 69% of Hoosiers are registered to vote, but only 22% voted on Tuesday. Voter turnout was modestly low or low, upper low. 22% is not a high turnout, especially for a presidential election. Now, Donald Trump is already the nominee. He's got the delegates he needs to win the convention. So I assume that may have left a lot of people who typically come out in presidential years. Maybe they didn't vote. But I will say this, one interesting statistic is that 1 in 5 Hoosier voters in the Republican primary voted for Nikki Haley. That could mean a couple things. There are, of course, people who don't like Donald Trump. There are people who cross over from the Democrat side, vote in the Republican primary, who would not vote for Trump. And and I'll get into that a little bit later about how that skews some things. But that is one thing that could be a possibility. Certainly, what is surprising is that 21% of Hoosiers would vote for someone who has no chance of winning and isn't even running as a protest to the presidential nominee. But I want to start off with governor, even though it's not the top of the list. But that's one that probably got the most attention statewide, and that is the race for governor on the Republican primary side. Now, on the Democrat side, it was an uncontested primary. Jennifer McCormick will be the Democrat nominee. You may know her. She was the former superintendent of public instruction. She ran as a Republican, had voted as a Democrat in the past, ran as a Republican, butted heads with Governor Holcomb, and then is now running for governor on the Democrat side. But on the Republican side, voters picked Mike Braun. You know him probably as U.S. Senator. He's leaving the Senate to run for governor. He won by 18 points, received 40% of the vote. And something you're going to notice in almost all these races, most candidates in these big races won with less than 50% of the vote. So we had a lot of divided races. It also means that your vote really mattered in those races where you cast a vote. So now Mike Braun won by 18 points. 6 candidates ran for governor, accounting for $40 million spent for this election. That is, by my research, more than twice in just the primary, more than twice what either Mike Pence or Eric Holcomb spent in their gubernatorial races throughout their whole year in both May and November. So an enormous amount of money was spent. As you know, you got lots and lots of ads, lots of postcards, but there was a huge amount of money spent on the governor's race this year. the biggest in history, in fact, in Indiana. So Suzanne Crouch, the lieutenant governor, currently got 22%, coming in second. Brad Chambers was third with 18%. And then Fort Wayne businessman Eric Doden came in with 12%. And then the others were behind that. Now, something that happened you may not be aware of, it's just starting to get a lot of news coverage right now. I'm not sure why Mike Braun did this. The day after his election, he was getting all this media attention about his win, of course. Well, he also announced on Wednesday, in case you missed it, that he wants Indianapolis area state representative, first-term state representative Julie McGuire to be his lieutenant governor. Now, I probably would have waited a few days and kept that story going, but Julie McGuire is a first-term state representative from Indianapolis. She is not super well known, but she is a conservative. Everything I know about her is positive, and from a pro-family, pro-life perspective. But this is not the end of the story. The convention this summer of Republican delegates, and you may have voted for delegate when you voted. Where I voted, there were 71 candidates running for delegate for 10 spots. So we had 3 pages of delegates where I live in Noblesville. But the delegates, about 1,800 of them across the state, will meet this summer, and they will choose lieutenant governor. Now, typically, the convention just goes along with whoever the nominee wants. But this year, you have Pastor Micah Beckwith, who also ran for Congress, did quite well when Victoria Sparks first won, came in third, and he decided to run for lieutenant governor in the convention. So there will be a convention battle, and it's also possible someone else could file, other people could file to run for that position too. So that will be some interesting politics we will see this summer to see who becomes Mike Braun's lieutenant governor running mate for governor in the fall. I want to mention next, I think, Senate. Senate was an uncontested race on the Republican side. Early on, it had been contested. You may have heard of a guy named John Rust running against Jim Banks. Jim Banks being the current congressman in the 3rd District near Fort Wayne. Jim decided to run for U.S. Senate, but John Rust did not make the qualifications for being on the ballot, so Jim was uncontested. Of course, he won unanimously in the Republican primary. He will face Valerie McRae, and I have to look at my notes because I've not heard of her. I did know the person challenging her in a 2-person race, and that was former state representative Mark Carmichael, who lost fairly significantly, about 60-40, to Valerie McRae. So this fall you will see Valerie McRae, Jim Banks, and any independents or libertarians who are running in that race for U.S. Senate to fill the seat that Mike Braun is leaving. So the next races I want to talk about are congressional races. And we had several congressional races. In fact, I don't remember a time where we've had as many open seats in Indiana among our delegation. We had several open seats where legislators were not running again, all of whom were Republican. And so my first mention will be 1st District up in northwest Indiana. That's not an open seat, but you have a first-term Congressman, Frank Mervan, will be running for re-election. Frank's a Democrat. Know his father quite well as a state senator, former state senator. And Randy Niemeyer will be running against him. He was chosen in the primary, I think, of a field of 4 different candidates, and we will see how that goes in the fall. Now, that is one district. I mentioned it because even though it's not an open seat, it is somewhat competitive. It's possible Republicans could win that race, although not sure, but things are changing demographically up there with a lot of people from Illinois moving to northwest Indiana and working out of Chicago in that area. So the demographics have changed in that traditionally long-time Democrat area has changed quite a bit. So that will be an interesting race to watch for U.S. Congress. In the 3rd District, which is the seat that Jim Banks currently holds, which he's leaving to run for Senate, you had an open seat there with a very hotly contested race. In fact, it was one of the top 10 races in the United States for the most money spent in that district. And former Congressman Marlin Stutzman ran and won in a very heated primary by only 1,400 votes with just 24% of the vote. A very, very close race, won over Tim Smith. There were two other stronger candidates. There were several, I think 6 or 7, but Judge Wendy Davis and State Senator Andy Zay, who I know well, who will be returning to the Senate. But those top 4 were all close, and Marlin won with, I believe it turned out to be about 0.5% of a vote in 1,400 votes. So every vote in that race mattered, and Marlin will face off in the fall. And I'm sorry, I do not know who he's running against. I didn't look at that in the fall on the Democrat side. In the 5th district where I live, just north of Indianapolis, Hamilton County, Grant, Tipton, some of those areas, Victoria Spartz is the current Congresswoman. And as you may remember, Victoria announced last year she wasn't running again, and then she changed her mind a few weeks before filing deadline, but several candidates had already gotten into the race, most notable perhaps being my state representative from Noblesville, Chuck Goodrich. And Chuck is a successful businessman, spent millions of dollars in that race, and so you saw a very heated race with 6 or 7 candidates, and Victoria won that race by 6 points over Chuck Goodrich, which shows in some ways, even though she was a first-term Congresswoman, the power of incumbency is huge. And I'll get to that even in the State House here in just a minute. But it is unusual for an incumbent to lose. And in that case, Victoria will run in the fall. And in a somewhat difficult seat that she may have a Democrat opponent, she will in the fall. And we'll see how that turns out for her. In this 6th district, which is Greg Pence's seat, who decided not to run again, which is kind of south of Indianapolis, going out east towards Richmond. You had a former Indianapolis city councilor who ran for mayor 7 months ago. Jefferson Shreve won that race with only 28% of the vote, which is not much. But there were several other candidates running. And I'll say this, Jefferson Shreve, in his own words, is a moderate. He flip-flopped on the Second Amendment and on life when he ran for mayor. And what you had in that case, unfortunately for pro-family people, is that you had 4 other conservatives running, any one of which vote totals could have given Mike Speedy, who came in second, the 5,000 votes he needed to win. But you had 3 other candidates who received about 7,000 to 10,000 votes. And so you had conservatives split 4 different ways, and the moderate candidate won there. It'll be interesting to see what type of candidate the Democrats put up. Will they put a conservative up and maybe make that race more competitive? I honestly did not look at who ran on the Democrat side in that seat. It is a Republican-leaning seat. But Jefferson Shreve won that, spent $6 million of his own money, and flooded the district with a lot of ads. In the 8th district, we had a race between several candidates. I knew several of them, but the 2 primary candidates were former Congressman John Hostetler and State Senator Mark Mesmer. I know both of these men well. I really, really like John Hostetler as a person. John was a congressman for many years, solid Christian, good man. However, John is kind of cut from a different mold in more of the Ron Paul, Thomas Massey type, and John cast some votes. John is kind of a, I wouldn't say he's anti-Israel, but he's anti-foreign conflict and a lot of times anti-foreign aid. So he had cast some votes against Israel funding that Mark Mesmer used very effectively against him right at a time when you had college campus, protests everywhere, when Israel's been attacked. And I think that swung the race for Mark Mesmer, who won with 38% of the vote. And we will see what happens in the fall in that race. So State Senator Mark Mesmer will run, and I believe in his state Senate race, there will be a caucus to replace him. So I'll keep you updated on that. In the State House, there were only 2 incumbents who lost. I talked about the power of the incumbency. And in one case, it almost didn't count. In one sense, we lost only 1 incumbent in the State House, because the first person I'm going to mention who lost was State Senator David Vinzant. I don't even really know him very well. He's a Democrat who was caucused in January to fill a vacancy. So he served for 4 months, 5 months, and then was defeated in the primary for his state Senate seat. But the much bigger surprise was out east near Attica in Indiana, where State Representative Sharon Nagel, who is a 5-term state representative, lost, and she lost pretty handily in a 60-40 vote to Mark Spencer. I don't know what played into that. Representative Nagel was not super conservative, more of a moderate, but I think a lot of local issues, from what I read, played in there. And this U.S. military veteran, Mark Spencer, defeated her on some of those issues, I believe. So we'll see what type of legislator he is, assuming he wins in the fall. But in their other state house races, really the most competitive ones were some of the open seats, and there weren't very many big surprises in the state house. So we'll see what happens in the fall in many of those races. And again, we will have iVoter Guide for you to look at again in the fall, so you can be informed on all the state house and federal races at iVoterGuide.com. One thing I want to mention that I found of interest, and this will apply to some of you, but I was looking at some of the numbers where I live in Hamilton County. And for years, Hamilton County was the Republican county in Indiana. It was often compared to Orange County in the 70s and 80s of California. It was a very, very red county. What is interesting is how that county has changed. All of the donut counties, the counties around Indianapolis, mirrored the statewide totals for governor and for president in the Republican primary, except Hamilton County. What is interesting there is that I mentioned Nikki Haley gained 21% of the vote. In Hamilton County, she got 34% of the vote. And Brad Chambers, who was one of the most liberal, more liberal, he had a Democrat-leaning group endorse him. He actually almost won Hamilton County. He won Marion County, the only county that he won, by 122 votes, but he only lost Hamilton County, a very Republican county, by 18 votes to Mike Braun. So what I think is happening in Hamilton County, you have a lot of people moving into that area, and you have a lot of people say, this is a Republican county. If I'm going to have any influence, I'll vote in the Republican primary. But you had 34% vote for Nikki Haley. You had almost half, or a high percentage of people voting for Brad Chambers. Well, when they moved on down the ballot, I tend to think that those folks voted for more liberal Republicans. And so now in Hamilton County, you have a lot of offices held by very moderate Republicans. And the reason I mention that is I think that will happen in many other counties as you see population changes and apartments being built and different things happening, more moderate people coming in, big spending in these counties kind of dilutes the conservative message or conservative ideology of Republican office holders. And so that's just a little side note on some fascinating things I saw looking at various election results. Now, there were several races where, not just in the congressional race, but at the local level, people won races by less than 100 votes or less than 200 votes. So your vote mattered. And I understand, I heard from a lot of people thinking, my vote doesn't matter, I'm discouraged, nothing changes. Folks, nothing changes if we don't vote. Nothing changes if we don't get involved. And nothing changes if AFA is not effective being your voice for values in the public arena. So I want to encourage you again to support AFA if you can. Continue to read our weekly emails, watch our videos, pass those around. But most of all, thank you for voting. Thank you for using iVoter Guide. I hope that was helpful. That will be available again in the fall. But continue to support us and help us as we get the word out, not about politics, but about policies and how politics play into good public policies that help families in Indiana. So again, appreciate your support. Hope that information was helpful as you kind of dissect what happened following the election. But I want to hope that you have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for watching these videos. And again, thank you for your support of AFA of Indiana.